This is the story of the contaminated blood affair, of how thousands of people, many of them with haemophilia, in France were infected with the HIV, AIDS virus, and hepatitis C through blood products that were known or suspected to be unsafe. France, the early 1980s, a time of optimism in medicine, advances in treatments for haemophilia, new technologies, a belief that science could stay ahead of the next threat. Yet beneath that hope, a shadow was growing. A shadow of deadly consequences, of systemic failure, of trust betrayed. It is
Hell A, you curious about health? Hell A, wanna learn without the stress? Hell A, welcome to contaminé.
In the 1970s and early 1980s, the treatment of haemophilia in France, an inherited bleeding disorder where the blood does not clot properly, was transformed. The introduction of clotting factor concentrates allowed patients to live more normal lives, to inject at home, reduce bleeds. But those concentrates came with hidden risk. Because these products were derived from pooled blood plasma from many donors, one contaminated donation could infect an entire batch. In other countries, this risk was already being discussed. In France, blood collection and blood product manufacture were tightly controlled by national agencies. On paper, the system looked robust, but the reality was more fragile. Then came the arrival of HIV, a virus that still carried fear, mystery, and stigma. The connection between blood products and HIV transmission was increasingly evident by the early 1980s internationally. Yet in France, the inertia remained. By 1984 to 85, the warning lights were flashing. For example, in the United States, a heat treatment method to inactivate HIV and clotting factor products had already been shown to be effective. In France, a confidential meeting of the Centre National de Transfusion Sanguine, CNTS, the National Blood Center, concluded that essentially all stocks of factor concentrate used in hemophiliacs were likely contaminated with HIV. Yet the decision was made to continue distributing those stocks without informing patients. The reasons given? Fear of blood shortage, cost, national scientific pride, and a reluctance to import heated products or tests developed abroad. The consequences were devastating. In the mid-1980s, French hemophiliacs began dying of AIDS. Shortly thereafter, it was confirmed that many had been infected through contaminated clotting factor concentrates. In rough numbers, about 4,000 to 5,000 people in France were infected with HIV via blood products in that period. Others, recipients of transfusions, not just hemophiliacs, also became infected with HIV and/or hepatitis C. The scandal was becoming a national health disaster. More than half of all European post-transfusion HIV infections occurred in France. And yet, many of the victims did not know the risks or were not warned. The system that was supposed to protect them failed. One of the most shocking aspects, although by early 1985, the Centre National Delaware Transfusion Sanguine had concluded contamination was almost total, they did not halt distribution until later and only then introduced heat treatment. Meanwhile, patients kept receiving contaminated products. As the scandal surfaced in the early 1990s, public outrage grew. Investigative judges produced a lengthy, 225-page report accusing 3 former ministers of major responsibility in the affair. In 1999, the Cour de Justice de la République, the special tribunal for government officials, tried 3 former ministers: Laurent Fabius, former Prime Minister, Gérard Dufoix, former Social Affairs Minister, and Edmond Hervé, former Secretary of State for Health. Meanwhile, the Centre National de Transfusion Sanguine, CNTS, director, Michel Garetta, was convicted and received a 4-year prison sentence for his role. In the words of victims, "I don't want your compassion. I want to know why I was infected." The trials were messy, protracted, and for many victims came too late. Justice delayed was justice denied. One woman testified from her wheelchair. She contracted HIV during a transfusion in August 1985 while giving birth. Another father lost both sons. Friendships fractured by fear. Stigma forced many victims into silence. Many victims say, the worst pain was not the disease itself. It was the betrayal, the feeling that those in charge had known the risk and yet did nothing, or too little, too late. Another legacy, the silence. For years, the voices of hemophiliacs and their families remained unheard. In the decades since, France has taken steps, legislation, compensation funds, improved screening and treatment practices. But for many victims, reparations came late, and some never saw full justice. The scandal also spurred activism, greater patient rights, more stringent controls on blood products, and a recognition that safe is a process, not a guarantee. Across Europe, the French Affaire is cited as a wake-up call, yet it remains a cautionary tale. No healthcare system is immune from failure. The lives lost, the families destroyed, the trust betrayed, they compel us to ask, how will we respond next time? How will we ensure the vulnerable are protected? How will we ensure that institutional inertia does not equal death? France's 1980s blood scandal is more than a tragic chapter in medical history. It is a mirror held up to our systems of care, our institutions of power, our values as a society. When medicine meets bureaucracy, when public health collides with politics, when profit or pride blocks precaution, people die. But when we listen, when we act, when we place safety, transparency, and ethics above all else, then every patient, every donor, every vulnerable person stands a chance. Let us remember the victims of the contaminated blood affair. Let us honor their suffering by becoming better, safer, more accountable, more humane. Because the cost of complacency is always paid in human lives.
Click subscribe, come take a peek. It's smart, it's fun, it's cartoon.